Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go! Backstory. I went to school in a predominantly white area, and being white myself, I had it pretty easy. Parents who cared for me and my activities, friends who respected each other, and all around a normal high school experience. Not really important, just want to paint the picture. Like all high schools, I was bullied, not a big surprise, I'm your generic nerdy white boy with glasses. I had a small friend group and generally never caused problems. Where it begins. There was this group of popular kids in my school who were on a football/basketball team and always caused trouble. Whether it be fights or bullying, they never got expelled and were what we call super seniors, students who get held back in their senior/junior year until they graduate or turn 19. They had a bully boner for my friends and me, but it never fazed us. We were used to it over the years. This was our senior year and we were all trying our best to maintain our grades and whatnot when I started a class called Engineering Physics second semester. I took AP Physics the year before and my teacher recommended it to me since he also taught that class. I noticed very early on that it was taken as a blow-off elective for people who thought you just build cool stuff and pass. Needless to say, it was, but the tests were physics-based. So we took them with partners. One day I got paired with one of my friendly neighborhood bullies, who we will call Chad. Now, I knew he slacked off in class and didn't really care because he just took the class to be with his friends, but they were smart. They never paired with each other and instead chose the smart kids to basically do the test for them. We got through it. Me answering every question and we turned it in. After the tests, we were allowed to work on our monthly projects, i.e. Rube Goldberg, mousetrap car, wooden bridge, and so on. At the time we were working on a mousetrap car, I was nearly done, a week ahead of the due date, when I finally got started testing different wheels and pull arm lengths. Things were going smoothly when Chad came over and asked for helpful advice, basically just wanting to copy my design and use it for himself. I say, yeah, I get it, just use 2 computer CDs and a long copper rod for the pull arm and it will get a B at least. Chad says, yeah, I don't really know how to put it together, could you just do it for me? I was not surprised, but instead of doing as he asked, I thought about showing him how to do it himself. He basically just coughed at the idea of doing actual work. Just do it or I'll screw your sister, you little trash. So I did it, knowing that he would retaliate and probably hurt me or my sister. I was pissed / scared, but it was whatever, until a week later. The trial started, then they ended. I got an A, but Chad got a C. He was furious. Part of me thinks that the teacher knew what had happened and altered his grade due to Chad doing this before. But it came with brutal retaliation. He jumped me later and gave me a black eye, 2 lacerations on my face that thankfully didn't require stitches, and a torn earlobe. Ouch. I didn't dare report him to the police or a school advisor because I knew it could be worse later. I healed after a few weeks, but I swore if I ever saw him again, he would regret everything. Now, you know I wouldn't be posting here if we never met again. Little did I know it would be 6 years later. The encounter. Time went on, years went by. I secured a job with a security company after my associate's degree and made decent money. I mainly deal with truck drivers 95% of the time and have only written 3 major incident reports in the 4 years I've worked there. The day was normal, no problems until enter Chad. I didn't know at the moment he came in, but it was him, 100%. I found that after he handed me his license. I knew because he had this one for 3 years, obviously expired, and I remembered his putrid, disgusting bile face. The memories came back. I hadn't thought about Chad in years, to be honest I forgot he even existed, until that day. He came in, didn't recognize me and I took care of him like anyone else, except he has to come back to me when he leaves with his outbound trailer. So I planned. I thought of what I could do to make him remember me, to make him hurt like I did. Now I graduated with a degree for criminal justice, so I have a pretty good understanding about laws and regulations in my state. and since his license is expired, I thought I could use that to my advantage. So I basically told Chad what trailer to pick up and where it was. He went and grabbed it and brought it back to me. I say, "Hey, sorry, but I gave you the wrong trailer. We are using that one later to fill a load and the site manager just called me about it." He gave me one of those, "Really? God, you're wasting my time" looks that I get all the time. Chad says, "Look man, I'm almost out of hours and I need to get out of here. Can't they just reassign it?" No, unfortunately, once the trailer is assigned, blah blah security talk. I told him he needed to go get a different one instead. This was true and not part of my plan, but I rolled with it. He kept nagging about how it will get him fired if he doesn't take his break on time and that he's already on his dispatcher's watch list. I loved when he told me this. I was going to do whatever I could to make him waste as much time as possible. So I called our yard dog, a driver on site who moves trailers in and out of dock doors. And I told him a driver was refusing to drop their trailer and that he needs to be escorted out of the property. The yard dog came and stopped in front of his tractor so he couldn't move forward and told him to unhook immediately. For a second he waited outside of his truck yelling obscenities and stuff, and eventually the yard dog and myself went into the guard shack in case he got violent. Chad yells, "Screw this!" Big mistake, Chad. Big mistake. Chad jumped back in his truck, drove around the yard dogs when he was in my guard shack, and left as fast as he could. I was already on the phone with my supervisor and he told me to call the police. Trailer theft is a felony in my state, so I did. Told him the tractor number, his name, and a description, along with the trailer he had and his general direction of travel. About an hour went by before I had a police cruiser show up and ask for me. He questioned me on the whole who, what, when, where, and how. He told me that he was caught up eventually and was arrested. They needed me as a witness and to make a statement for their report. So I made sure to mention myself noticing his expired license and everything else. To the best of my knowledge, Chad will be getting at least a year of prison time, as felonies are a 1-year minimum, and fired from his trucking company. Granted, I technically just did my job, but I made sure to be as detailed as possible and made sure he pays for what he did to me all those years ago. I hope to have updates when the trial comes around, if it ever happens, but the officer told me for the most part, my statements should be enough for them, and I might not even have to go to court. But I sincerely hope I get to. I'd love to see his face when a judge slaps his sentence and remind him of the past and what he did to me. P.S. Who's a trash now, Chad? So to get you all up to speed, I'm going to give you a rundown of my situation. I went no contact with my mother back in October. She threw a tantrum about her husband not being invited to my Halloween party. The reason he wasn't invited, he was abusive to me my whole life. He molested me for 2 years, he sexually assaulted me, he was physically, emotionally, and verbally abusive as well. He's a sociopath. He doesn't care about who he harms or anyone else's feelings. He's a pedophile, and that's why I'm protecting my child from him and my mom. I went no contact with my mother's husband almost 2 years ago. I went no contact in May 2022 when I found out I was pregnant and I moved in with my husband shortly after. My mother tried extreme methods to get her way. She had sent me fake custody papers in the mail to try and scare me. Her husband came to my door yelling and demanding to see my daughter. He yelled, cursed, and kicked my door, which I got with my Ring doorbell camera. He was arrested by officers for not leaving and for threatening them. They have been non-stop trying to contact me. My mother even showed up to my husband's job and caused a scene. So that's the rundown of the whole situation. So my mother came to my door this morning when my husband just came back from his overnight shift at his job. She banged on our door and my husband answered it. For context, the situation was all caught on camera. I have cameras outside my apartment door and I have one in the house pointed at the door. My husband told her that she wasn't welcome here. She yelled at him and said, "I want to see my daughter. She's been ignoring me. I'm her mother. She has no right to treat me this way." I was instantly irritated. I told my husband to go to the back room with our child. I walked to the door and blocked her from getting inside. She was yelling and screaming at me like a crazy person. She threw a tantrum because she found out about my daughter's party and she wasn't invited. She said it wasn't fair. She demanded I let her in my house to see my daughter, who for some reason she calls her daughter. It's creepy and weird. She tried to bulldoze her way into my house and I tried to shut my door and she pushed against it. I was flung into the wall so hard it left a hole in our drywall. I have bruises on my forearm. I screamed at her to get out. She shoved me and I saw red. I punched her in the face so hard that she flew back. I managed to get her out of my doorway and we shut the door and locked it. My husband called the police. She was arrested for assault and for attempted break-in and entering, or whatever they will call it. Now she's telling everyone on my Facebook friends a fake sob story and claimed that I assaulted her, even with the camera footage of her assaulting me. She's still lying. I pressed charges. We are moving when our lease is up in April. We will be moving into a house with my husband's dad for safety reasons. I really didn't want to punch her, and I feel awful that I did, but I was defending myself. But I still feel like it could have been handled differently. I need advice on moving forward and what other precautions I can take. Update. My mother was arrested and charged. Her bond was posted. Her husband was arrested a few months ago for coming to my apartment door and acting a fool. His bond was also posted. His court date for coming to my apartment, trying to break in, threatening officers and so on is February 15th, I believe. I have a protective order against her husband, but I'm still in the process of getting one against my mom. She called my husband's job this morning asking for him, and thankfully he switched shifts. My mother keeps calling me from blocked numbers and sending me fake friend requests on Facebook. Seriously, I'm glad we're moving. One of my most entertaining things in customer service / dealing with a public role is a husband and wife dynamic. Sometimes the husband is a more reasonable of the two. Sometimes the wife is a calm and understanding one. Other times they are both a bunch of rotten apples. On this particular day, I had a lovely wife with an extremely aggressive husband come into the warehouse and pick out a storage ottoman they wanted. Now the storage ottomans were a frustrating item, as a metal mechanism that allowed the lid to be opened and shut made the ottomans extremely heavy, needing at least 2 times people to lift it. Naturally aggressive douchebag husband flat out refuses to pay delivery for his ottoman he's just purchased. In his words, "We'll just pick it up." Yeah, right, buddy. More like, "We'll drive our small car round back and your warehouse staff can do it." The husband and wife conclude the sales process in store and the sales associate passes a copy of the paperwork on to me. I scan it over and make sure they have ticked off and signed off on the terms and conditions. That all clearance sales are final, that all clearance sales are as is. That warehouse staff / sales staff are not covered under any insurance for loading or unloading customers' goods, and customers are responsible for the pickup of any item they purchase / order and so on. The customer pulls their car around, and it's a smallish car but should be fine. The husband walks over and I show him where his freshly bagged ottoman is and hand him a trolley. "What's that for?" "To load your ottoman, sir." He chuckles. No, you're helping me." "There's 2 of you, sir. You'll be fine." "Well then, I'm canceling my order and filing a complaint against your company." I just sigh. I don't want to cost this salesperson a sale, but my gut is trying to tell me something. I quickly go into the office and grab a release form, which we use for anyone picking up clearance. I make a few handwritten notes of my own. I bring the paperwork back out and show it to the customer. "Sir, could you fill out your full name, contact details, and initial these handwritten comments and sign this release?" "Why?" "It just says that you're happy to have me help you load up your ottoman and that if anything happens you won't hold us liable." He smirks and says, "Wow, you guys sure take things seriously." I just smile as he signs the document. I passed it to my offsider, asking him to make a few photocopies for the sales associate, the manager, the area manager, and the general manager. The wife grabs one end along with her husband, and I grab the other end. We all lift it up and begin walking toward the trunk of the car. The wife seems fine, but the husband is struggling. He keeps asking to put it down so he can take a break. We pick up the ottoman again, and as we are just about to reach the car, the husband lets go of his end. The lounge tips to the right. I lurch forward and the ottoman smashes into the back of the car, taking out the right-hand side tail light. The wife immediately starts laughing as the husband loses his mind. He's inspecting the damage and is looking at me with wild eyes, wanting me to offer him an admission of guilt. I calmly stand there as they load up their ottoman and drive away. Is that the end? Absolutely not. The next day, the husband calls the store. He's filing a lawsuit against the company for damages and has provided HR and head office with excessive estimates. Immediately, I am called into the boardroom upstairs. There is a general manager, the manager, HR, and a legal representative who is there for the shareholders. The GM and HR explain to me that they are not risking a lawsuit, that they are going to pay for this guy's car, and that they are going to fire me. Without a word, I take out the document the customer signed. I hand it to the HR representative, who hands it to the GM. I say, the customer signed off on a release form after I explained that the company didn't cover or expect me to load his goods. The customer clearly stated here that if I helped him, he was absolving me of any liability including vehicle damage. The GM hands the document over to the lawyer who scans it, and his face changes. They know they can't do anything. Me, I couldn't help but add this. Ask your lawyer over there. I did exactly what the customer asked me to do. I helped him. It was the customer who dropped his into the ottoman. He caused the damage, not me. There is silence in the room. I turn and walk out. I've had enough. I go to the warehouse, grab my bag, get a bus home, and play some Dead Space 2. There was an aftermath. I went to my best friend who was a lawyer and filed my own lawsuit against the company for a variety of issues, and also sent a few emails out for the company to be investigated. The aftermath and revenge. The aftermath of my legal battle, trying to keep it vague-ish and not as detailed just in case. After this nonsense transpired, I got together with my best friend and we started looking into the company and the safety procedures they were breaking. The fact they were not hiring enough staff to safely lift items, no lift access in the store which breaches safety laws regarding moving heavy items and also breaches a few laws around access for people on wheelchairs or disabilities. No overtime pay when people are forced to work overtime. Now a few other things that my best friend uncovered in his investigation. The general manager ran a special promotion during my time there. That proceeds will go to a cancer charity. And guess what? The $50,000 meant to go to charity disappeared and somehow found its way into his bank account. There was also some claims made about the furniture that were false. Made in Italy, actually made in China. 15-year warranty, actually 2-year warranty. Unlimited cleaning for the entirety of you owning the sofa. Claims were always denied, stuff like that. Armed with all of this, my lawyer and I went to a mediation, where their legal team tried to pressure me into not taking a payout of my wage, my holiday pay, and a payout of all my other benefits if they made this lawsuit against me go away. Imagine their surprise when my lawyer began bringing up all the safety violations, staff wage discrepancies, not to mention the outright lies and stealing carried out by management. The meeting was quickly postponed, and a lawyer for my ex-employer and a general manager asked for a private conversation outside. They asked me what it would take for me to not go ahead in court. My lawyer asked for all my benefits paid and to pay out the rest of the year as if I had been working a 5-day week. They deliberated for 15 minutes before they agreed. What they didn't agree on is that we couldn't send out the violations to all the necessary government bodies. Last I heard, the GM and management team were fired and the company was fined $250,000. Let me tell you a story that sounds like it's straight out of a horror movie, but I promise every word of it is true. It all happened on our usually quiet and friendly neighborhood, where everyone knows everyone, and the most exciting event is the annual block party. Or at least it used to be until Karen, not her real name, but you know the type, took neighborhood watch a little too seriously. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind where the sun lingers in the sky, begging everyone to stay outside a bit longer. My kids were out playing with a couple of their friends from down the street. They were racing their bikes, laughing and enjoying the freedom that only summer can bring to a bunch of school kids. Their route took them past Karen's house, a place we all knew to treat carefully around. Karen had this immaculate garden, her pride and joy, which no ball, frisbee or foot was ever welcome to disturb. Now, I was in the garage, tinkering away on some woodworking project or another, enjoying the piece, when suddenly the piece was shattered. The kids came racing back, their faces pale, eyes wide, panting like they had run a marathon. Behind their frantic words and gasps for air, the story unfolded. "Mom, Dad!" One of my kids panted. "Karen, she's gone crazy. She chased us with a chainsaw." My other kid nodded, eyes still round with fear. "We didn't even go near her garden, I swear." Their friends, equally shaken, chimed in with their agreement. It sounded too ludicrous to be true. A chainsaw? Really? But then the unmistakable roar of a chainsaw engine split the air, followed by a voice, shrill and angry, unmistakably Karen's. I rushed to the end of our driveway in time to see Karen, chainsaw in hand, tearing down the street after another group of terrified kids. It was like something out of a nightmare. My heart raced, fear for the kids mixing with disbelief at the scene unfolding before me. Without thinking, I yelled at the top of my lungs, "Karen, stop! What are you doing?" She whirled around, chainsaw still buzzing menacingly. "They are ruining my garden. I'll teach them a lesson they won't forget." But before I could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air. A patrol car rounded the corner, its lights flashing urgently. A patrol car rounded the corner. 2 officers jumped down, guns drawn, aiming at Karen. The surreal situation escalated as they shouted for her to drop the chainsaw. Karen, perhaps in the grip of some wild rage or panic, didn't comply. Instead, she turned the chainsaw toward one of the officers, screaming, "I'll chop you down before you take me." The tension was palpable. The officers, trained for situations less bizarre than this, tried to de-escalate. "Ma'am, drop the chainsaw now. This is your last warning." But Karen, defiant to the surreal end, ripped the chainsaw in a threatening gesture. That's when the sound of a taser broke through the chaos. Karen seized up and fell, the chainsaw clattering harmlessly to the ground beside her. The officers quickly handcuffed her, calling for backup and an ambulance, ensuring she didn't injure herself further. The street was now lined with neighbors peeking out from behind curtains or standing on their lawns, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The aftermath was a whirlwind of police questions, statements, and a neighborhood in disbelief. It turned out, upon reviewing Karen's so-called evidence, the real culprits behind Garden's misfortune were a family of raccoons, caught on a motion sensor camera she'd installed. The kids, my kids, had been innocent all along, their only crime being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Karen was taken in for evaluation, facing charges for her actions. The neighborhood slowly returned to its peaceful state, but the story of the chainsaw chase remained the talk of the town for weeks to come. As for my kids and their friends, they are a little more cautious now about where they play, but they have also learned a valuable lesson about the importance of not jumping to conclusions. And me? Well, I've learned that sometimes real life can be stranger than fiction, and the quietest streets can hide the most unexpected stories. So there I was, stuck in yet another seemingly endless chemistry class, with my lab partner Ryan. We were both sophomores, just trying to get through the semester without any major disasters. That day, our task seemed simple enough. Hold a thermometer in a pan of water for what was supposed to be a 20-minute experiment. Easy, right? Wrong. You see, the catch was that you couldn't let your arms get tired and accidentally dip the thermometer to the bottom of the pan, or else the reading will be off. Sounds simple in theory, but in practice, it was a test of endurance. After just a couple of minutes, my arm started to feel like it was going to fall off. I looked over at Ryan, who seemed to be faring no better, his face twisted in concentration and discomfort. Our professor, Karen, a formidable woman with a no-nonsense attitude, made it clear from the get-go that she expected nothing but the utmost precision and dedication in her lab. She paced around the room, her eyes scrutinizing every move we made, ready to pounce on any signs of deviation from her instructions. Remember, accuracy is key. Karen reminded us for what felt like the 100th time. Don't let the thermometer touch the bottom, or your results will be compromised. As the minutes dragged on, Ryan and I exchanged wary glances. It was then that a spark of rebellion, or perhaps desperation, lit up in Ryan's eyes. Without a word, he started rummaging through our lab station, pulling out our lab books and a handful of paper clips, while I held his thermometer. "What are you doing?" I whispered, looking nervously at Karen, who was busy berating a group on the other side of the room. "Just watch," Ryan muttered, his hands moving deftly. Before I knew it, he had constructed the most ludicrous-looking contraption I had ever seen in a chemistry lab. Using the lab books as a makeshift stand and intricately bending the paper clips to create a holder, Ryan managed to suspend the thermometer in the water without it touching the bottom. It was a ridiculous sight, but it worked. I couldn't help but let out a quiet laugh, both at the absurdity of the situation and the ingenuity of my lab partner. "It looks interesting," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice down. Ryan grinned, proud of his handiwork. It's not about how it looks, it's about efficiency. Our triumph was short-lived, however. Karen, having dealt with the group she was scolding, turned her attention to us. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the sight of our makeshift thermometer holder. "What on earth is this?" she demanded. Ryan, ever the brave soul, stood up straight and explained. "It's a way to keep the thermometer steady without it touching the bottom, just like you asked." Karen's face turned a shade of red I had only seen on the pH scale charts. "This is a chemistry lab, not a craft workshop. I expect you to follow instructions, not invent ridiculous contraptions to get out of doing the work." The class fell silent, all eyes on us. I felt a mixture of embarrassment and defiance. Yes, our solution was unconventional, but it was effective. Karen, however, was not impressed. "I will not have this kind of nonsense in my class," she declared. "Remove that thing at once and hold the thermometer as instructed." Reluctantly, Ryan disassembled his creation, and we resumed our positions, arms aching more than ever. The rest of the class proceeded without incident, but the mood was somber, the collective energy dampened by Karen's outburst. After the class, as we were packing up, Karen approached our station. I braced myself for another lecture, but her tone was different this time, almost reflective. "I understand the intent behind your contraption," she began, with a softer voice this time. "And while I cannot condone bypassing the instructions, I must admit, her ingenuity caught me by surprise." Ryan and I exchanged a surprised look. This was not the outcome we had expected. "However," Karen continued, "in the future, please stick to the guidelines provided. There are reasons for the methods we use, even if they are not immediately apparent." We nodded, accepting her begrudging acknowledgement of our creative problem solving. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. As we left the classroom, Ryan couldn't resist one last jab. Do you think she was more enraged by the contraption or by the fact that she had to admit it worked? I laughed, the tension from earlier dissipating. Probably both. But hey, at least we make chemistry class a little more interesting today. And so our chemistry class saga came to an end. It was a lesson in following the instruction, yes, but also in the value of thinking outside the box. Karen may not have appreciated our method, but in her way, she acknowledged our effort. And in the grand scheme of things, that recognition felt like all the validation that we needed. You know, I've had some weird experiences at work before, but nothing tops the saga of my coworker, whom I will call Flea Man, and his unique contribution to our office environment. It's a tale so bizarre you'd think it was made up for laughs, but every word of it is true. And it culminates in an epic act of workplace rebellion against the manager who could give Cruella de Vil a run for her money. It all started on an ordinary Tuesday. I walked into the office, coffee in hand, ready to tackle the mountain of paperwork on my desk. But instead of the usual buzz of keyboards and office chatter, I was greeted by a chorus of itching and scratching. You see, our office had suddenly become ground zero for what I affectionately refer to as Fleabaloza 2012. The culprit? Flea Man, a well-meaning but clueless coworker who had unwittingly turned his love for stray cats into a full-blown flea circus. His trailer home had become a haven for over a dozen felines, none of which had seen the business end of a flea treatment or even a bath. The result was an infestation so severe that it hitched a ride on Flea Man's clothes and made its grand debut in our office. The boss was quick to act, closing down the office for extermination and sending Flea Man to work from home with a laptop. "Here's a laptop. You telecommute now," he said, probably thinking he'd solved the problem with minimal fuss. Little did he know the laptop would be the least of our worries. Flea Man's domestic situation was, to put it mildly, not conducive to remote work. Between the constant meowing and the flea circus rehearsals, he could barely focus. He started bombarding the boss with complaints about the laptop, which led to the boss trying to send me into the fray to fix whatever imaginary issue Fleaman had concocted. I remember telling my boss, I'd rather quit than set foot in Fleapalooza 2012, which in hindsight was probably the best career decision I've ever made. Despite the exterminator's best efforts, the squeal of Fleapalooza premiered just a few weeks later. Fleaman came into the office to pick up his paycheck, and in the brief time he was there, managed to unleash Fleapalooza 2. Electric Boogaloo. The office was infested again, leading to an uproar among my co-workers. It was the final straw. The boss, facing a mutiny, had no choice but to let Fleaman go. You'd think that would be the end of our troubles, but no. Enter Karen, our manager, who could make a saint swear. She started throwing us under the bus, blaming us for everything from the infestations to the coffee machine breaking down. It was clear something had to give, and give it did. In the most spectacular fashion. As morale hit rock bottom, we hatched a plan. It was bold, it was petty, and it was perfect. We reached out to Fleaman for one last mission. The plan? Invite him to visit the office under the guise of picking up some personal items he'd left behind. But really, it was to give Karen a parting gift. A third and hopefully final installment of Fleapalooza. Fleaman, perhaps feeling a mix of loyalty to his former comrades and a desire for a bit of revenge, agreed. He arrived, spent a good hour wandering the office, and left without so much as a word to Karen. By the next morning, the office was buzzing again. But this time, it was with the news of our mass walkout, not the hum of fleas. Karen arrived to an office devoid of workers but filled with the unmistakable signs of a flea infestation. The look on her face when she realized she was a captain of a sinking ship with no crew but plenty of fleas was just priceless. In the end, the office had to close down for another round of extermination. Karen was left to deal with the fallout alone, as we all found jobs elsewhere, in places where the most exciting thing that happened was the occasional paper jam. Looking back, the whole experience feels surreal. It was a testament to the saying that truth is stranger than fiction. Fleapalooza 2012 and its sequels taught us the importance of solidarity in the face of adversity and fleas, that sometimes the most effective way to deal with a problem is to unleash a flea-infested coworker on it. My family emigrated to America in the 1880s and settled in Nebraska. We were farmers for the first 80 years or so, but back in 1960s, my great-grandma decided she was going to sell the entire farm before she died and simply give her sons one-third of money for inheritance when she passed. She had 3 sons. In 1969, my great-grandpa passed, and her 3 sons inherited the money he had earned from selling the farm. My grandpa decided he would basically let that money sit until after he retired from the military. In 1971, he deployed to Vietnam for his second and final deployment. At the end of his deployment, he returned to Nebraska and returned after 22 years in the service. Now he had an old Chevy truck at the time and was in the process of building a concrete business with the money he had gotten from his inheritance. Well, during this time, his truck engine blew up. My grandpa was busy at the time and he didn't want to fool with the truck cause, well, he was busy. So he bought himself the engine he wanted to replace it with, which was an upgrade, and he went down to the only garage in town and asked them if they would be willing to put the engine in the truck. They agreed on a price and told him to come back in a week or so. A week later, my grandpa comes back and picks up the truck. He admits he felt like a fool or not double-checking the work, but assumed since this was the son of his friend, that the son would do right by him. This was a small town. Well, my grandpa opens up the concrete business and he's busy when it comes time for his first oil change. This is about 4 months after he got the truck back. He's doing the oil change and he notices that the engine he bought isn't the engine in his truck. It's a smaller engine. This obviously pisses him off to high heaven, as my grandma liked to say. So he storms on down to the garage and talks to the shop. Earl was the owner. Earl comes out and denies any wrongdoing. Says he did as he was told, and it shouldn't have taken him 4 months to bring the issue up. My grandpa tells Earl he needs to do what's right, and Earl refuses. It's important to know that this is a small town. Written contracts and so forth really isn't a thing. Your worth is your word. My grandpa tells Earl he's going to get him for this. Earl laughs, and tells him to leave his shop. My grandpa goes down to the county and requests the record for who owns that gas station. Turns out it's an old family friend named Harold. My grandpa stops by Harold's house and starts inquiring about the business deal Harold has with Earl. Harold says, well, Earl rents the gas station/garage from him. My grandpa asks Harold how's everything going, and Harold confides that Earl hasn't paid his rent in 2 months. My grandpa asks, do you have a written lease with Earl? To which Harold goes, nah, I sure don't. My grandpa then asks what if I bought the gas station/garage from you? Harold isn't completely on board with the idea, but my grandpa makes a strong point. Earl isn't paying his rent, Harold doesn't seem like he has much interest in being a landlord anymore, and my grandpa has the cash to buy the place outright. Harold, sensing something is up, asks my grandpa, did Earl do something to you? You seem awfully interested in his garage. Ain't you busy with that concrete business of yours? And my grandpa fills Harold in on a story. My grandpa also mentions that he has a son, my father, who needs something to do, and he'd be happy to buy the whole building from Harold for a fair price. But what happens after that is his business. Also, it's important to note when Harold decided to rent this business to Earl, in that deal went all the equipment and tools that Harold had acquired over the years, so those belong to the building. Harold and my grandpa came to a number that they both agreed on. A few days later, my grandpa paid Harold in cash, in full for the business. The paperwork is done, and my grandpa is now the proud owner of a gas station and mechanic's shop. Now my grandpa senses that Earl ain't going to be too pleased when my grandpa fires Earl, so for extra good measure, my grandpa calls up the local sheriff, who is a high school friend, and asks the sheriff to come with him to break the news to Earl. So my grandpa and the sheriff go down to Earl's now former business and they walk in, and before my grandpa can even say hello, Earl says, now I told you, I didn't cheat you. My grandpa smiles and says, I'm not here about my truck. I'm here to fire you. Earl, with a look of confusion on his face, asks, you can't fire me. I own this business. My grandpa shows him the title and says, I am now the owner of this building. To which Earl fires back, but I got a deal with Harold. And the sheriff speaks up, you do? Do you have a lease? Well, no. Earl says that. To which the sheriff smiles and says, well, in that case, you're going to need to take your stuff and leave. Earl is fuming pissed, grabs his toolbox and storms out. My grandpa ended up hiring the mechanic that would occasionally work on his trucks at his concrete business. He had my aunt and grandpa run the gas station full time and my dad would work there after school. We owned that garage for 25 years before my grandpa sold it to someone else.
And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.